Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Israel has mobilized tens of thousands of reservists as it prepares for a major assault on Gaza City while considering a new ceasefire proposal after nearly 2 years of war. The move signals Tel Aviv's determination to seize Gaza's largest urban hub, despite global criticism and warnings of mass Palestinian displacement. Israel has given final approval for a controversial settlement project in the occupied West Bank, a move critics say could cut the territory in two and destroy hopes for a future Palestinian state. The plan was celebrated by far-right Minister Bezalel Smotrich as a rebuke to Western nations recognizing Palestine, calling new housing nails in the coffin of statehood. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accuses European leaders of making clumsy attempts to sway US President Donald Trump's position on Ukraine. He said their meeting with Trump and President Zelensky offered no constructive ideas, only escalating rhetoric. The Kremlin downplays speculations of an imminent meeting between Presidents Putin and Zelensky, even as Donald Trump presses for direct talks to end the war. Trump, after hosting European leaders and Zelensky in Washington, admits the conflict is tough to resolve and warns Putin may not want a deal. Ukraine's Prime Minister says 14 people, among them a family of 3 with children, were wounded in an overnight Russian drone strike on the northern Sumy region. Prosecutors say 15 drones hit the Al-Qatra area as US President Donald Trump intensifies efforts to negotiate an end to the war. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says Tehran cannot fully sever cooperation with the UN nuclear watchdog after Parliament curbed inspections following June strikes on its nuclear facilities. He says inspectors must remain involved despite new laws requiring high-level security approval for future visits. Chinese President Xi Jinping arrives in Lhasa for his second visit as leader to mark 6 decades since Beijing founded the Tibet Autonomous Region. Established in 1965, it followed the Dalai Lama's exile after a failed uprising and became China's 5th and final autonomous region. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accuses Australia's Anthony Albanese of betraying Israel and abandoning the Jewish community, calling him a weak politician. The diplomatic rift deepens after Canberra moves to recognise a Palestinian state, prompting visa restrictions and sharp war of words on both sides. We start in Europe, where Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has criticised European leaders, calling their efforts to influence US policy on Ukraine clumsy and unconstructive. He says EU attempts to escalate the crisis have been clear. Lavrov insists security issues cannot be resolved without Russia, citing the 2022 Istanbul Agreement as an example of effective security guarantees. He praises the US administration for understanding the root causes of the Ukraine crisis and rejecting the continuing of war. Lavrov stresses any reliable security guarantee for Ukraine must include Russia at the table. Listen in to what the Russian foreign minister had to say.
Я уверен, что на Западе, прежде всего в Соединенных Штатах, прекрасно понимают, что всерьез обсуждать вопросы обеспечения безопасности без Российской Федерации – это утопия, это путь в никуда. Мы пока видим только достаточно агрессивное нагнетание обстановки, достаточно неуклюжие и, в общем-то, такие неэтичные попытки изменить позицию администрации Трампа и лично президента Соединенных Штатов, как мы это наблюдали во время сопровождения европейцами господина Зеленского в Вашингтон. Вот, понедельник на этой неделе, мы там не услышали никаких конструктивных идей из уст европейцев.
We're now joined by Ross Feingold, who's a political analyst, and he joins us from Taipei in Taiwan. Ross, the world is reacting to those huge talks yesterday in the White House, where we saw President Zelensky and Donald Trump be much friendlier than they were before. Obviously, Zelensky had to bolster him, a plethora of European leaders by his side. However, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian top diplomat, has called these efforts from Europe's closest allies clumsy and unconstructive. What do you think he's talking about in particular?
He might be concerned about the possibility that the Europeans and even the United States are going to insist on some kind of buffer force, or we could call it a peacekeeping force, if some people prefer, that would be on the ground and possibly in the air as well. President Trump has already indicated a willingness on his part to provide air cover, but not troops on the ground, which he's going to put pressure on the Europeans to do. Obviously, the Russians don't want that. They don't want a buffer force between their military and the Ukrainian military. But one thing that the Russians need to understand is that this is not a dictating of terms by Russia, even though they have the advantage militarily on the ground at the moment. And it looks like President Trump is going to put pressure on Ukraine to accept the reality that parts of its territory are occupied by Russia. This is a negotiation, and it's very likely that part of that negotiation will include a multinational force separating the two militaries, and Russia really needs to accept that.
Ross, Sergei Lavrov has praised the US administration in his view of understanding the root causes of the Ukraine crisis. Do you think Donald Trump has done that from a Russian perspective?
I think this is just Russia trying to flatter President Trump. I really doubt that President Trump has spent a lot of time trying to understand the history of President Putin and his government's grievances with independent Ukraine, post-Soviet Union independent Ukraine. But that's a term that the Russian government and the Russian state-controlled media like to use. They like to say root causes, and they talk about things like Ukraine's moves to be part of NATO or to be part of the European Union. They've made these ridiculous accusations about the Ukrainian government being filled with Nazis and genocide against Russian speakers in the Donbass region. A lot of this is just simply not true. But Russia does say these things. And again, it's not a surprise that they're trying to flatter President Trump and say that he really understands the issues.
What do you think of Russia's approach, Ross, when it comes to insisting security issues which have been floated at these talks in Washington yesterday? Lavrov says that security issues cannot be resolved without Russia. Do you see them agreeing to any possible US security guarantees from Trump's administration?
They might have no choice. If they want the war to stop on terms that, frankly, are fairly advantageous to Russia in the sense that it might continue to occupy Ukrainian territory, then they're going to have to give in on some other points, such as a multinational buffer force and potentially some kind of security guarantee from Europe and or the United States that's provided to Ukraine. But if they want the fighting to stop, and keeping in mind the fighting is incredibly costly for Russia, both in terms of men and resources, cash. So they also have an incentive to stop. And there's an important thing here as well. And frankly, I don't think it's gotten the amount of media attention that it deserves in the past few days. Another thing that Russia desperately wants is partial or total removal of international economic sanctions, or specifically sanctions imposed by the United States and its European allies. So as part of a negotiation, Russia's going to have to give in on some points. They're not going to get everything that they want, and that's just the nature of negotiations.
Yes, Ross, do stay with us as we move over to North America for our next development. President Donald Trump has called on Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook to resign, escalating tensions between his administration and the central bank. In a Truth Social post on Wednesday, Trump wrote, "Cook must resign now," linking to a Bloomberg article detailing allegations of mortgage fraud. According to the Bloomberg, the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency asked Attorney General Pam Bondi to investigate Cook over 2 mortgages. A letter from Trump ally Bill Pulte alleged Cook falsified documents to secure favourable loan terms, potentially committing fraud. No charges have been filed, and it remains unclear if Bondi will act. The move comes as Trump sharpens criticism of the FED, frustrated with Chair Jerome Powell's resistance to steep interest rate cuts. A Cook resignation would give Trump another chance to reshape the FED board after Governor Adriana Kugler's departure earlier this month. Cook's current term runs until 2038. We're once again joined by Ross Feingold to discuss this. Ross, this merely marks another chapter against Donald Trump's tirade against the FED board. How unprecedented is it for a US president to attack certain members of the FED board like Donald Trump has?
It's not unusual for a president to voice their opinions on interest rates. Of course, the more personal attacks or the social media attacks, that's new in the Trump era, whether his first term or his second term. But certainly a president has every right to voice their opinion on what they think the trajectory of interest rates should be. That doesn't mean the Fed is going to listen to the president. And obviously, Chairman Powell is not listening to President Trump's criticisms, despite the vociferous criticisms from President Trump. Now, the post on social media by the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, he has a huge following. He's got over 3 million followers. So he's also a political appointee by Trump, so he's a partisan. He's been critical of Chairman Powell, and now he's going after other governors as well. And President Trump picked that up immediately and reposted it on his own social media. Is she going to resign? Well, as you said, she's got a long time to go in her tenure until 2038. Maybe this investigation will turn up actual criminal wrongdoing, or maybe it's just a way to pressure her to resign so that President Trump can nominate his own person to the board.
Ross, Donald Trump's use of social media is certainly a unique one. Do you think it truly does put pressure on these agencies, on these important individuals in governments, both at home and abroad? Well, how would you analyze Donald Trump's use of his Truth Social platform, and also now you could say its power?
We've always said historically in the United States that the president has what's called the bully pulpit, and the president is free to use that. When the president speaks about domestic or world policy or international relations and other issues, people are going to listen and people are going to respond, and some people are going to be fearful of what the U.S. president says, understandably. Of course, in the social media era, that's just amplified because people see the message instantly on their electronic devices, and President Trump is a prolific user of social media. Now, when it comes to U.S. government, it's clear under the current Supreme Court and by the actions of the Trump administration that have been upheld by the courts, that he has exercised an enormous amount of authority over federal agencies that previous presidents may have been more hesitant to do. But the Fed specifically for now is maintaining its independence, so neither Powell or other governors have given in to the demands of President Trump. But it's possible that Governor Cook might say, I don't need this, and she might just resign.
Ross Feingold, pleasure as always. Thank you for taking the time and joining us. We now move on once again. Germany says it rejects the escalation, warning it is hard to see how the new Gaza offensive will lead to freeing hostages or securing a ceasefire. Jordan's Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi went further, calling Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's policies a destructive project designed to keep the region in crisis. Let's listen in to what the Jordanian Foreign Minister had to say.
ثمة مشروع دماري يقوده رئيس الوزراء الإسرائيلي لإبقاء المنطقة رهينة الصراع ورهينة الأزمة، ونرى تبديات هذا المشروع في استمرار العدوان على غزة وفي تجويع الفلسطينيين وفي محاولات تهجيرهم، وهو ما نرفضه بالمطلق. ونراه أيضا في سوريا التي ندعم جميعا أمنها واستقرارها ووحدتها وسيادتها، ونراه في الاعتداءات الإسرائيلية على الأرض السورية والعبث الإسرائيلي بالشؤون الداخلية السورية، مما يدفع باتجاه المزيد من التأزيم والمزيد من اللا استقرار.
This comes as Israel is escalating its military campaign in Gaza. The government has approved a plan to seize Gaza City, authorizing the call-up of 60,000 reservists and extending service for 20,000 more under Operation Gideon's Chariot. We're now joined by Ahmed Fatwa, who's a spokesperson for the Fatah movement. He joins us from Ramallah in the West Bank. Thank you very much, Fatah, for joining us here on the programme. Ahmed, even given this huge international condemnation from Israelis protesting throughout the streets of the country, this offensive seems to be happening with 60,000 reservists called up to start this plan, occupy Gaza City. Your response and what you think this might bring?
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Pleasure.
Of course, what Israel is doing is beyond words and is extremely dangerous. The occupation plan that was announced by the Israeli cabinet is threatening the lives of 2 million Palestinians. Just recently, they are evacuating cities in northern Gaza and the Gaza City. We are talking about nearly 1 million human beings, after being evacuated for several times by now. And as you know, they are deprived from all aspects of life, from food and water or oil or even transportation to move them from place to place. And also they used explosive robotics for the first time to demolish and obliterate entire cities. We are talking about completely erasing northern Gaza and are now in the process of erasing Gaza. So this is a war crime that is unprecedented in the modern world. The reaction by the world is in the right direction and actually need to be intensified and increased, because what's going, as said by the Jordanians, as said by the Europeans, as said by every expert in this planet, is only going to lead into an endless cycle of violence and a humanitarian catastrophe that would require decades to heal from. Israel is threatening the two-state solution and is the only viable solution for any peaceful and any security in the region, which in retaliation will erupt the entire region and therefore the entire world. Recently, as you have seen, Netanyahu fanatical speech saying the Greater Israel project is his God mission on planet Earth. This, blatant speech, this dogmatic speech coming from Prime Minister threatens not only Palestine, but threatens also the neighboring countries, because Greater Israel projects means the occupations of part of Syria, occupation of Jordan, occupation of Sinai Desert from Egypt, and reach until Iraq. So that is a colonial project that is scary. And right after that speech, Smotrich announced the E1 colonial settlement projects, which separate the West Bank north from the south. He stated just today that this aims to erase the Palestinian state and to put a new facts on grounds to destroy any prospects for a two-state solution. So that stands in defiance to all the efforts by the international community to find a peaceful settlement for the question of Palestine.
Ahmed, we need to... Israel have said that this plan is aimed at rooting out the Hamas strongholds, both of which are in Gaza City. How much of a hold have you heard, do you know, that Hamas still has on Gaza City, if any?
Of course, this is another Zionist propaganda nonsense. Everything is because Hamas. They destroyed all the hospitals, saying there is Hamas, while not showing any evidence of that headquarters that they claimed. Now they want to obliterate entire cities, and they say for Hamas. I haven't seen in modern history any war like this, and I think you too haven't seen any of that. They have deployed 200,000 soldiers. They aim to deploy 200,000 soldiers for a Gaza Strip, which is a land of the size of 360 kilometers, to fight a militant group of no more than 20,000. And I believe after all the damage they received from the 2 years war, it's much less than that. If we compare that to the Iraq war, United States of America, while fighting a more organized regime with the higher power and military power, They deployed 150,000 soldiers on a land that is more than 500,000 kilometers square, which is more than 10 times the size of Gaza. So we are seeing here an evident extermination plan while using Hamas as a pretext, which, by the way, Hamas just recently approved and accepted the Witkoff peaceful and ceasefire proposition. But right until now, Netanyahu did not respond.
Yes.
So what we are seeing here is an extermination plan, and he said it with his own tongue that he wants to go for a greater Israel. That demands from all the world to act, and surprisingly, the United States is supporting and endorsing that act. Recently, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the United States Congress, visited Israeli settlements and visited dogmatic, extremist settler projects who, if you heard about it, the red cows that they want to bring to Palestine to bring the Armageddon. This is the kind of madness that we are dealing with, and that requires from the entire world to pay attention, because we are dealing with not a normal occupation or colonial regime. We are talking with a fanatical regime and supported by the United States, unfortunately.
Ahmed, thank you. Always a pleasure speaking to you and getting your insight. Thank you for taking out the time. We now move over to the Indo-Pacific, where, speaking in Jakarta, German Foreign Minister has said that instability in the Indo-Pacific directly affects Europe's security, citing China's growing assertiveness in the South China Sea and rising tensions in the Taiwan Strait. He warned that any conflict would have global consequences for security and prosperity. His remarks follow Beijing's criticism of Germany after he accused China of being increasingly aggressive and attempting to alter borders. Waitful also linked Russia's war in Ukraine to Asian stability, pointing to support from China and North Korea. He said the Russian war machine is fueled partly by North Korean troops and Chinese economic backing. The comments come as Chancellor Friedrich Merz joined President Trump, Ukraine Zelensky and European leaders for talks on Ukraine. Let's listen in to what the German Foreign Minister had to say.
What happens here in the Indo-Pacific has a direct impact on European security and vice versa. China's growing military assertiveness in the South China Sea not only threatens Asia's security, but also undermines the international rules-based order. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is not only an attack on the European peace order, it also affects Indo-Pacific security, because the Russian war machine runs in part of North Korea troops and ammunition, as well as on China's decisive economic support. All of which serves to show that European and Indo-Pacific security are closely interlinked.
We're now joined by Andrew K.P. Leung. He's a China strategist and he joins us live from London. Andrew, always a pleasure to talk to you. Is the German Foreign Minister correct in saying that Indo-Pacific security affects Europe? He raised the issues of China, the issues of North Korea, their influence. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that we are seeing a persistent and increasingly misguided European view of the rise of China. China's rise is inevitable. Every country tries to grow the economy, expand the development, but there was a misguided view that somehow China's rise, along with its capacity to defend its own interests, represents a threat to Europe. Now let's unpack these kind of misguided view. I mean, it has three trends. The first of all is the South China Sea. Of course, China's so-called assertiveness, within quotation marks, is of course China's.
Oh dear, we have some network.
Because,
oh, apologies,
well,
Andrew, we have you back.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you. Great.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Okay, well, the South China Sea, again, because of China's increasing capacity to defend the sea lane communication, which, of course, China relied on to a very large extent for its economy, unlike other countries, because China relies on the South China Sea for the import of its trade, products, materials, components, and also international trade, and China relies on international trade to a much larger extent than Europe or the United States. Now, and of course, Taiwan, of course, is a key issue for China. But then the defense of China's sea lane of communications, defending China's sovereignty over Taiwan, do not necessarily represent a threat to Europe. This idea that reference to the rule-based order is a kind of travesty, particularly in the light of what President Trump is doing at the moment, destroying the rule-based order, throwing it out of the window, and replacing it by American unilateralism, hegemony, and also bullying. Now, the second trend is, of course, perceive China's help to Russia over Ukraine. Again, this is slightly misguided because China and Russia were joined at the hip long before the Ukraine war. The economy of Russia and China are extremely complementary, and Russia is the world's largest exporter of energy and agricultural products, and China is the largest customer. So this relationship existed long before the Ukraine war. And then last but not least is the trade. Of course, China's competitiveness on trade, on electric cars, of course, it seems to be a threat. In a way, there is a truth in that because a lot of jobs are lost. And the key pillars of European industries, like the car industry, are completely sort of rattled and challenged. But then, of course, China is willing to invest in the production of cars in Europe. For example, in the UK, you will go to London, where I am at the moment, see all these black cabs, and almost half of them are now produced by a Chinese company based in Coventry. It's called LEV, London Electric Vehicles Coventry.
Okay.
So I think this model can be replicated and trade disputes can be negotiated. All in all, the rhetoric that China somehow represents an existential threat to Europe is, I think, slightly misguided.
Andrew, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Always a pleasure to talk to you. We now move over to the African continent, where, according to reports, the death toll from an attack by gunmen on a mosque and surrounding homes in Nigeria's northwest Katsina state has risen to at least 50, with around 60 others kidnapped. The attack took place early on Tuesday in the remote village of Unguwan Mantau, located in Mulamfashi district, as Muslim worshippers gathered for Fajr, the dawn prayers. Witnesses reported that armed assailants arrived on motorcycles, opening fire inside the mosque before moving throughout the village. Katsina police spokesperson stated that officers intercepted the attackers and successfully foiled a planned assault on the two villages. However, while fleeing through Mantau, the assailants opened fire on residents. He added that several homes were set on fire before security forces arrived at the scene. The reports also stated that 27 bodies were recorded at the morgue, although many victims were taken by relatives for Islamic burial rites. Northwest Nigeria has witnessed a rise in attacks by gangs locally known as bandits in recent years. These gangs target villages and highways, kidnapping residents for ransom and extorting farming communities. We're now joined by Michael Atit. He's a freelance journalist and he joins us live from South Sudan. Thank you very much, Michael, for joining us. Pleasure for speaking to you. What more can you tell us about this incident in particular and the broader spectrum of attacks like this that go on in the region?
Thank you so much for having me. And what I could begin to describe this incident is as an unfortunate incident which occurred on innocent civilians that actually they were praying And this could amount to lead to a very serious humanitarian situation and a genocide as well. That western region of Africa, in Nigeria and Mali, Niger, and name them, even Cameroon and Niger, they have been witnessing a lot of attacks, and these attacks are so much linked to the ISIS, and they are linked to the Islamist group known as Boko Haram in the West Africa, and they have been carrying out a lot of similar atrocities and similar attacks on civilians or even on government facilities. They even can go further as much as attacking people in the worshiping places such as mosques and churches and other humanitarian groups. So these groups have been operating in such area with a very tightened security situation that the government in that region have been trying to tackle them, have been trying to engage them in dialogues, but it is very difficult. So such a situation that happened in West Nigeria, this is an unfortunate incident, and this could amount to the already previous atrocities that have been committed by the group or by the local gangs.
Michael Atit, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Pleasure to have you on the programme. Thank you for taking out the time. We now move on once again, but that is all that we have time for.